There was a street at the edge of the town where few people walked anymore. Its cobblestones were uneven, its lamps unlit, and the shutters of its houses stayed closed even in the day. Most passed it by without a thought, moving toward brighter places. But Elias, that evening, let his steps drift there. He had no reason for it. He was simply wandering, letting his feet choose their own way. The air was heavy with the scent of wood smoke from chimneys, and a mist curled low along the stones. His hand trailed across a wall as he walked, the stone damp beneath his fingertips. That was when he saw the door. It was taller than it seemed it should be, set into a building that looked otherwise forgotten. The wood was weathered, its paint a faded green, and a small iron handle sat dull with rust. Yet above it, almost hidden by ivy, was a carving the outline of an open book, its pages spread wide. Elias paused. Something about the sight pulled at him. He pressed the handle gently, expecting it to resist. But it turned, and the door creaked open without effort. Inside was silence. Not the emptiness of an abandoned house, but a full silence, one that seemed to press against the skin. The air was cool, carrying the faint smell of paper and dust. Like the breath of old books. He stepped inside. The room opened wide before him, lit only by narrow windows set high in the walls. Rows upon rows of shelves stretched deep into the shadows, filled with books of every size and age. Some were bound in leather, cracked with time. Others wrapped in cloth worn smooth at the corners. Elias closed the door behind him. The latch clicked softly, and with that sound, the silence grew even deeper, wrapping around him like a cloak. He walked slowly down the nearest row, letting his hand glide along the spines of the books. None bore titles. They were blank, each one. He stopped, frowning slightly, and drew one out. The cover was plain, the pages inside empty. No words written anywhere. But as his fingers rested on the paper, he heard it. A voice, soft, low, like someone speaking from far away. It rose faintly from the book, though no words were written there. He leaned closer, listening. The voice was not clear, but it carried a rhythm, like a story being told just out of reach. Startled, he closed the book, and the sound vanished. Opening it again brought the voice back, faint, persistent, impossible to understand, but impossible to ignore. Elias stood very still, holding the book against the quiet. This was no ordinary library. Elias held the book against his chest for a moment, almost afraid of it, though the sound within was not threatening. It was quiet, almost sorrowful, like someone remembering a story they could no longer tell. He set it carefully back into its place, and the silence returned, deep and complete. He drew a breath and continued walking. His footsteps echoed faintly on the wooden floor, though each echo seemed absorbed quickly by the air. The shelves stretched endlessly, vanishing into dimness, and he wondered how such a place could exist without anyone knowing. At the next row, he pulled out another book. This one was bound in dark brown cloth, its surface rough beneath his fingertips. The pages inside were blank as before, but when his hand touched them, a different sound rose, the voice of a child, laughing faintly, followed by the murmur of a woman's tone, warm and soft, like a lullaby sung long ago. Elias stood still, the book open in his hands, listening. The words were impossible to make out, yet the feeling was clear. Comfort, gentleness, the kind of sound one remembers from childhood, but cannot quite place. It left a heaviness in his chest, a kind of longing for something nameless. He closed the book. The voices faded. He walked on. Each book he touched carried a different sound. Some whispered in tones of sorrow, others hummed as though reciting poems, and one even filled the air with the distant roar of waves. Though no ocean lay near, the shelves seemed endless. He wandered deeper, tracing the rows as if he might find some order. The light from the high windows grew fainter the further he went, and soon the library felt as though it were stretching beyond the size of the building he had seen from the street. At last, he came upon a table set in a small clearing between the shelves. On it lay a single book, larger than the rest, bound in deep blue leather. Dust had gathered thickly on its cover, though no other books here seemed so touched by time. Elias hesitated. His hand hovered over it, his breath slowing. The silence around him felt denser here, almost waiting. Finally, he brushed away the dust and opened the book. No sound rose this time. No whisper, no echo, nothing at all. The pages were blank, pure white, untouched. And yet, when he leaned closer, he realized he could see faint impressions on the paper, not ink, but indentations, as though someone had once written there and the words had been erased. His fingertips traced the grooves, and though no sound came, a strange calm settled over him. He felt as though the book were waiting for him, waiting to be filled. Asterisk. Elias closed the heavy blue book and let his hand rest on its cover. The quiet it carried was unlike the other volumes. Not emptiness, but a stillness that felt alive, as though it was waiting for him to decide something. He left it there, though his thoughts lingered on it and drifted deeper between the shelves. The rows wound in ways that made no sense. Sometimes they curved, sometimes they split into two, and sometimes, when he looked back, the path behind him was not the same as the one he had walked. Yet he felt no fear, only a gentle pull, the kind of patience that comes when one is not being hurried. He let himself move slowly, listening to the faint groans of the wooden floor. The way his breath seemed to join the silence instead of breaking it. Now and then, he reached for another book. One opened with the faint sound of rain, steady drops, as though falling on stone steps. When he closed it, the sound faded, but he could still feel a damp coolness lingering on his skin. Another gave him the crackle of firewood, a low voice humming by the hearth. He stood with it open for a long while, closing his eyes, letting the rhythm calm him until it was almost as though he sat there himself. There was one that unsettled him. Its pages breathed a long, low sigh, not sorrow, not anger, but something heavier, like the weight of time itself. He shut it quickly, sliding it back into place, and moved on. Hours might have passed, or minutes. The library gave no hint. Light did not change, and the silence was without measure. Still, Elias did not tire. If anything, each step seemed to ease him, as though, the longer he walked, the lighter he felt. At last, he came upon another clearing, this one larger, its space lined with tall windows of frosted glass. A soft glow filtered through them, not sunlight exactly, but something gentler. In the center of the room stood a single chair, wooden and worn smooth, facing an empty lectern. Elias paused. He ran his fingers across the lectern's surface. It was marked with scratches, as though countless books had rested there, their weight pressing grooves into the wood. He almost expected one to be waiting, but it was bare. He sat down in the chair, letting his body sink into the shape it had been made to hold. A quiet warmth filled his chest. He thought of the blue book again, the one with no voice. He imagined it resting here, open, ready for words. For the first time since stepping into the library, he wondered if this place was not only for reading, perhaps it was also for remembering. Elias sat for a long while in the wooden chair. The stillness around him felt almost like company, as though the shelves themselves were listening. His breathing slowed, and for a moment he closed his eyes, letting the silence sink deeper. When he opened them again, his gaze returned to the lectern, empty, waiting. The thought of the blue book stirred in him again. He rose without hurry, his footsteps soft, and let himself drift back through the aisles. He did not wonder if he would find it. Some part of him already knew the shelves would guide him, and they did. After only a few turns, there it was, resting in its place on the dusted table, its cover deep blue, quiet as before. Elias touched it gently, feeling the leather cool beneath his hand, then carried it back to the clearing. He set it on the lectern and opened it. The blank pages stared back, white and patient. No voice came, no whisper, no hidden memory, only stillness. But something was different now. The impressions in the paper seemed clearer under the glow from the frosted windows. He leaned close, brushing his fingertips lightly across the grooves, and in his mind a faint picture formed. Not a sound this time, but an image. A garden dot, faint half-formed, like the memory of a dream. He saw the outline of a stone archway, vines curling across it, and the hint of a bench beneath a tree. No colors, no details, just the shape of it. Yet the sight filled him with a strange peace, as if he had been there once, long ago, though he could not recall when. He closed the book, then opened it again. The image returned, faint but steady. Elias sat back in the chair. He realized then what this library was, not simply a place of silent books, but of memories that could not speak in words. Memories that lived in sound, in feeling, in the faintest impressions left behind. And perhaps the blue book was not someone else's memory. Perhaps it was his. The thought settled over him gently, not as a revelation, but as a quiet acceptance. He placed his hands on the book, resting them there as though steadying it. The air around him felt warmer now, carrying the weight of something unseen. For the first time since entering, he whispered aloud, though his voice was barely more than a breath. "I remember." And though the library gave no answer, the silence seemed to deepen with understanding. The silence around Elias held steady, yet something in it shifted. Not broken, but stirred, as if the air itself had decided to listen more closely. He looked up from the blue book and noticed he was no longer alone. At the far edge of the clearing, between two towering shelves, stood a figure. Not imposing, not hidden, but simply present, as though they had been there all along and only now chose to be seen. The figure was cloaked in soft gray, their face gentle, lined with years that looked neither heavy nor harsh. Their eyes carried the same calm weight as the shelves, not watching him, but holding him, the way the library held every book. Elias did not startle. Somehow, their presence felt natural, like a quiet continuation of what he had already begun to feel. The figure spoke, but their voice was hushed, almost like the turning of a page. "You found it." Elias looked down at the blue book resting on the lectern, its pages still faint with the impression of a garden. He hesitated, then nodded. "I don't understand," he said softly. "Why is it empty?" The figure stepped closer, their movements unhurried. They placed one hand lightly on the lectern, beside the book. "Not empty," they replied, silent. Elias waited, sensing there was more. The figure's eyes softened. Some memories do not speak in words. They return only when someone is ready to listen, in their own way. Elias traced the faint lines of the garden again with his fingertips. "This one feels familiar." "It is yours," the figure said. "The books here are not only for remembering the lives of others. They also hold what you have set aside, what you thought you had lost, but never truly left behind." A quiet weight settled in Elias's chest. He could not say why, but he believed them. He closed the book gently. "And if I open it again?" The figure gave the smallest of smiles. "Then more will return. Not all at once. Slowly, as the silence allows." For a long while, Elias said nothing. He felt no urge to press further. The silence was not empty, and the figure's presence was not demanding. It was enough. At last he whispered, "Are you the keeper of this place?" The figure tilted their head slightly, as though considering the word. "Keeper, perhaps. Listener, more truly. I tend to the quiet, so it may remain steady for those who wander here." Their eyes met his, and for the first time, Elias realized how vast the library truly was. The shelves stretched far beyond what he had walked, perhaps endless, and the thought did not trouble him. It felt like standing at the edge of the sea, endless but comforting. The figure stepped back, giving him space again. You may stay as long as you wish. The silence will not fade. Elias looked down at the blue book once more. The faint image of the garden waited, steady, patient. He reached out, ready to open it again. Elias lifted the cover once more. The pages greeted him with that same pale quiet, but now the impressions felt deeper, more certain, as though the silence had ripened. This time, when his eyes softened and he let the blankness blur, the garden appeared more clearly. Stone first, the shape of an archway, tall and time-worn, with ivy weaving across it like threads of green lace. The vines swayed faintly in an unseen breeze. He could almost hear the leaves brushing against stone, a sound so gentle it was nearly part of the silence itself. He leaned closer. The faint outline of a path appeared beyond the arch, pebbled and uneven, leading inward. On either side of it rose hedges, trimmed yet softened by time, as if cared for once, but left to grow at their own pace. Elias closed his eyes, and without realizing, he stepped in. When he opened them again, he was no longer in the library. The ground beneath his feet was real, uneven, dotted with small weeds that sprouted through cracks in the stones. The air smelled faintly of earth, warmed by sun, even though no sun shone above. It was as if the garden carried its own light, soft and golden, spilling across every leaf. He touched the archway as he passed through. The stone was cool, rough, alive with the memory of rain. His hand lingered, and a quiet warmth pressed against his chest. Not just recognition, but longing. Inside, the garden opened wide. A great tree rose in the center, its trunk thick and gnarled, roots pushing up through the earth, as though reminding the ground to hold steady. Its branches reached out in a broad canopy, leaves trembling with silver-green edges. Beneath it stood a wooden bench, worn smooth from years of use. The sight of it drew Elias forward. He knew this place. He could not yet say from where, but it stirred in him like an echo, afternoons of sitting in silence, hands folded in his lap, not alone but not speaking. The air carried the scent of jasmine, faint but unmistakable. Elias closed his eyes again and breathed it in. His chest loosened, as if something locked inside had been gently opened. He sat down on the bench. The wood welcomed him, creaking softly under his weight, but holding firm. Around him, the garden breathed, leaves shifting, branches stretching, the faint rustle of petals drifting to the ground, and in that stillness, he felt it. A presence beside him, not the figure from the library, not someone unseen, but a memory. Someone who had once sat here with him. Their face did not come yet, but the warmth of their nearness was unmistakable. He did not force it. He let the silence carry it, slow and unbroken. The garden had not been forgotten after all. It had only been waiting. Elias kept his gaze lowered, watching how the roots of the old tree pushed up from the earth like frozen waves. His hand brushed across the bench, fingers tracing grooves worn by years of use, and then, almost without his noticing, the presence beside him took shape. It began as weight, the subtle sense that the bench dipped slightly, not enough to shift him, but enough to tell him he was no longer alone. He breathed in again, and the jasmine scent deepened, carried now by warmth instead of air. He did not turn his head right away. Something inside him whispered that if he rushed, the moment would fade. So he waited. A hand appeared first, resting on the bench close to his, pale, lined, steady. The sight of it stirred something sharp in Elias's chest. Not pain, not joy, but a quiet ache. The kind that comes when memory brushes too close to forgetting. He lifted his eyes slowly. The figure beside him was older, their hair streaked with silver, their face softened with time. Yet there was a gentleness that Elias recognized immediately. A curve of the mouth that once smiled at him, a gaze that once steadied him when he faltered. It was someone he had loved, perhaps a parent, perhaps a guide, The details had blurred with years, but the essence had not. It was unmistakable. They turned slightly toward him, and though no words left their mouth, Elias heard them clearly. "You found the way back." His throat tightened. He had not realized until this moment how deeply he had longed for it, to feel this nearness again. To sit where silence was not empty, but shared. He placed his hand gently over theirs. The skin beneath his palm was warm, steady. Real tears pressed at his eyes, but he did not fight them. They came quietly, falling without breaking the peace around him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. They sat in the garden as though no years had passed, listening to the leaves stir, watching light shift across the branches. Elias felt time loosen its grip, softening until it became nothing at all. Nothing at all. At last, the figure turned their gaze upward, toward the tree. Their lips moved, and this time the sound carried, low and even. Every garden needs tending, even the ones inside us. Elias let the words settle, sinking deep. He knew then that the silence of the library was not emptiness, and the garden was not gone. Both had been waiting, patient, steady, unhurried. He squeezed the hand beneath his tis. "I remember now," he whispered. The figure's smile was small, but it reached their eyes, and for the first time in many years, Elias felt whole. Elias stayed on the bench until his tears dried, until his chest eased, and the air felt light again. The figure beside him remained calm and steady, but as Elias shifted to stand, the presence began to soften. A hand squeezed, his once more firm, reassuring, then loosened, dissolving back into the stillness. He stood, brushing his fingers against the bark of the great tree, as though anchoring himself. The garden stretched before him, and he realized it was larger than it first appeared. Beyond the circle of the tree's canopy, stone paths branched outward in several directions, each framed by hedges or climbing roses. For a moment he hesitated. He was not sure if the garden wanted him to choose, but then, with no rush, his feet began moving toward the left-hand path, where a row of lantern posts lined the stones. The lanterns held no flames, yet they glowed faintly, like fireflies caught in glass. The path bent gently, leading him to a small pond tucked into the curve of the hedges. The water was still, clear enough to reflect every leaf overhead. He knelt and peered into it, expecting to see his own face. Instead, he saw moments. The pond's surface rippled, and pictures bloomed across it. Himself as a boy, running through summer fields. Himself as a young man, sitting under lamplight, reading by candles' glow. And then darker times, lonely nights, doors closed. The heavy weight of silence he once thought was empty. Elias reached out and touched the water. The images shivered and vanished, leaving only his reflection. He studied it for a long moment. Older now, yes, lines carved by time, hair thinner, eyes quieter. But behind it all, the boy was still there. The man was still there. He smiled faintly, stood, and let the pond be. The path drew him onward. Around the bend, he found a hidden alcove where jasmine vines climbed high over a stone wall. Their fragrance deepened, stronger here, almost overwhelming. He leaned close and breathed it in, eyes closing, remembering nights when the scent drifted through an open window long ago, carrying with it the comfort that he was not alone in the world. He moved deeper still, past the jasmine. Another path branched, this one narrowing until it opened into a quiet clearing. At the center stood a sundial, old and moss-covered, its stone surface etched with cracks. Yet the shadow it cast pointed steadily, as if time here was measured differently, not by hours or years, but by moments remembered. Elias placed his hand on the sundial, and again that warmth rose in his chest. He whispered softly, "I haven't lost it after all." And the garden seemed to breathe in answer. Leaves stirred, water trickled faintly, somewhere unseen. and the soft glow of the lanterns brightened as though approving his words. The silence here was not absence, it was presence, deep and alive. Elias walked on, slower now, savoring each step. He knew this was not only a garden of memory, but also a place of return. Each corner held something he had once loved, something he had nearly forgotten but not lost. For the first time in years, he did not feel like a wanderer searching for meaning. He felt like someone who had found home. The garden paths seemed endless, weaving through corners that opened like secrets. Elias followed one lined with ivy that crept high over stone walls. The air grew warmer, the scent of soil stronger, until he came upon a structure tucked at the far edge. It was a greenhouse. Its glass panes were fogged with age, edges rimmed with moss, yet golden light pulsed softly within, as though the space glowed from the inside out. A heavy wooden door, half ajar, welcomed him in. The moment he stepped inside, the air wrapped around him, warm, humid, alive with the fragrance of earth after rain. Plants of every kind grew in quiet abundance. Some he recognized: lavender, rosemary, small ferns, delicate orchids. Others were stranger, vines with silver leaves that shimmered faintly, blossoms that swayed though no breeze stirred. Elias walked slowly between the rows. Each plant seemed tended, though no gardener appeared. Pots rested neatly on tables, soil fresh, droplets of water clinging to leaves as though someone had just cared for them. He paused beside a tree no taller than his chest, its branches reaching upward in a patient stretch. On one branch hung a single fruit, golden as the lantern light outside. He reached toward it but stopped, sensing it was not his to take. Instead, he simply rested his hand on the trunk. The bark was warm beneath his palm, and in that touch he felt an understanding. The tree would bear more in time, and what grew here was not meant to be hurried. On a nearby table lay small clay pots, each holding sprouting shoots. Next to them sat a scattering of notebooks, their pages filled with sketches of plants in careful lines. He flipped one open. The drawings were simple but gentle, accompanied by faint impressions. The joy of new growth, the patience of waiting seasons, the steady rhythm of time. He closed the notebook, pressing his palm to its cover in silent gratitude. At the far end of the greenhouse, a tall window let in a stream of pale light. Dust drifted lazily through it, like motes suspended in water. Elias stood there for a while, gazing out at the rest of the garden, realizing how much was still unseen. Yet he felt no rush to discover it all. The garden would wait. It had always waited. As he turned back toward the door, he noticed something carved into the wood from the inside. Growth takes silence too. He traced the words with his finger, then stepped back into the cool air of the garden. The lanterns along the path glowed brighter now, as though guiding him back. And for the first time, Elias felt ready to return to the library. Not because the garden had finished with him, but because he had found enough for this moment. With slow steps, he followed the path that curved toward the great archway he had first seen, knowing the shelves would be waiting. The lantern path curled like a ribbon, leading Elias away from the greenhouse. He walked slowly, each step unhurried, as though the earth itself suggested he take his time. The garden seemed to watch him go. Branches shifted softly, flowers tilted toward the fading light, and the air carried that gentle jasmine fragrance once more. Ahead, the great stone archway stood where garden and library touched. Its pillars were worn, etched with faint lines that looked almost like vines frozen in stone. Passing beneath it felt less like leaving and more like stepping across a bridge, carrying something from one place into another. The moment he crossed, the hush of the library wrapped around him again. The air was cooler, still, filled with the faint scent of paper and dust, yet it no longer felt heavy or forgotten. It felt alive, like the garden itself had breathed into these halls. Elias stood in the wide aisle, books rising high on both sides. The silence pressed gently against his ears. But this time he recognized it for what it was. Not emptiness, but space. A silence that left room for thought, for breath, for remembering. He carried the warmth of the garden inside him now. It lingered in the steady rhythm of his chest, in the quiet patience of his steps as he moved deeper between the shelves. His eyes caught on a book resting open on a lectern. Its pages spread as though waiting. The paper was soft and yellowed, the words faint. He leaned close, and though the script was almost illegible, he could sense what it said. Not through sight, but through the calm echo it stirred in him. What grows in silence stays. Elias closed the book carefully and let his palm rest on the cover. For the first time in many years, he felt certain he belonged here. Not as a visitor passing through, but as someone who had found his way home. He looked down the endless rows and did not feel daunted. Somewhere in these shelves, perhaps everywhere, were pieces of the same truth he had touched in the garden, the kind that asked nothing but time and presence. He took a seat at one of the long tables, its surface smooth and cool beneath his hands. For a while, he simply sat, breathing in the silence, letting it surround him without resistance. He knew he could rise and wander the stacks whenever he wished. He knew he could return to the garden when the moment called. Nothing here was lost to him anymore. The library was no longer silent in a way that weighed him down. It was silent in a way that steadied him, like a pause between heartbeats. And in that pause, Elias finally rested. Elias remained at the long wooden table, his hands resting lightly against the grain, his breathing calm. Around him, the library stretched in quiet stillness. The shelves no longer felt endless. They felt like companions, waiting without urgency. Each spine a steady presence. A lantern at the far end flickered softly, casting ripples of light across the high stone walls. Dust drifted in the glow, slow and graceful, almost like snow falling in a dream. Elias watched it for a while, his thoughts quiet, his body loosening into the chair as though he had been carrying weight he no longer needed. He leaned back slightly, closing his eyes. The silence wrapped him, but he did not feel alone. He felt held, the way the garden had held him, the way the books seemed to lean closer, with quiet patience. Somewhere deep within the shelves, a faint rustle stirred, like a page turning on its own. The sound was soft, steady, and comforting, as though the library breathed in rhythm with him. He thought of the greenhouse, of the carved words in the door. Growth takes silence too, and he knew that here, in this place, the same truth lived. Each book, each leaf, each moment of stillness, held something waiting to bloom. His eyelids grew heavy. The long hall blurred into a soft haze. His breath slowed, even, like the rhythm of a tide. He let the last threads of thought drift away, resting fully now in the quiet. There was no need to search, no need to rise, no need to understand everything at once. The library would wait. The garden would wait. Time itself seemed to wait with him, and in that deep calm, Elias slipped into rest. The shelves faded into shadow. The lantern dimmed to a steady glow, and the silence, no longer forgotten, became the gentlest cradle